Hi everyone, welcome to today's session on sustainable change management and leadership. Um, so far, we've been going through the basic understanding of what sustainable change is, who a leader is, kind of ethical decisions you need to make as a sustainable leader. Today, we're going to look at the process of organizational development. When we think about organizational development, we're pretty much looking at it from a change perspective, but from a continuous improvement angle. So, with sustainability, we're trying to push for an era where it's not just about, oh, we have a project that we want to do that is sustainability focused, but we're thinking about it from a perspective of we want to make sure that every single process, every single structure, every single system that is in place within the organization aligns with our core values of sustainability. And so if we look at it from that particular perspective, then we're no longer saying change management because it's not a reactive measure, but now we're saying it's organizational development because it's proactive. So we're doing this not because we're getting external pressure. We're doing this not because this is what needs to be done at the moment or because this is what everybody expects us to do, but we're pushing towards sustainability because we see this as continuous improvement that is very beneficial to the organization in the long run. And so for us to think about organizational development, it's important for us to see the several processes or the steps that you would need to take as an organizational development practitioner or as a sustainable change manager. Okay, so like I've always said, this is the same thing I'm still going to keep saying. The challenge with change is not, oh, we are trying to create change. It's not just building the momentum. It's actually in the execution. It's how you go about it, the steps that you put into place, the processes that you put into place, how you make sure you get the right data, how you're making sure they are putting in the right system, how you're ensuring that every single person is a part of the process itself. The execution is what determines whether or not your change process would be successful. And then from the organizational development perspective or from the sustainable change perspective, it's how you execute the entire being of your project. So when you're saying, how do I move from where we are as an organization to a place where we actually have high emphasis on sustainability, the process through which you're going, the process you're going through is really what will determine how successful your organization will be to get to a space of sustainability. All right. So I want us to look at the general model of planned change. Remember, we're not doing reactive change, we're doing proactive change, and that is organizational development. For us to get to where we hope to be as an organization, for us to get to a space that is effective, a space where we're more efficient with our resources, a space where we're more conscious with the environment in which we operate in. The general model gives us the step-by-step guide in actually creating change within the organization. And it starts with the first one, which is entering and contracting. So before you actually go into change itself, there's a process where the organizational development practitioner or the sustainability champion in this specific case is going to get into a relationship or conversation with the organization. Now, if we go back to our conversation on a sustainability champion or an organizational development practitioner, we realize that we're saying that as a business or as a practitioner, it's not just, there are two angles to it. We have the internal the internal champions and then the external champions. The internal champions are those that already work within the organization. If you're an internal champion or you're an internal organizational development practitioner, the entering and contracting stage is not really going to be a major deal because you're already a member of the organization. You already have an employment. You already have the processes. You already know what happens within the organization. You already have a contract. But when we're bringing a person from outside to lead change within the organization, then the entering and contracting part is very important because it sets precedence for every other activity that happens within the whole change process. Now, after that, the next thing is the diagnosing stage. So we want to know what exactly is the challenge. Now, I want you to always think about it as sometimes it's not that there is a problem. Sometimes it's not because we realize that our cost is too high. Sometimes it's not because we realize that we are wasting resources. Sometimes it is just because we know that there's a room for improvement or there's room for improvement. So if we can already tell that we're doing so well, however, there's room for improvement, what we're doing is we're going to diagnose what exactly the room for improvement might be. Or if we're doing horribly in a certain area, the next thing we want to think, okay, what exactly is going on? How come our resources are going faster than we planned? How come we don't have a good relationship with our stakeholders? Why are our finances dwindling? In that process of trying to understand the why, what is happening, that is the diagnosing stage. Then moving on from there, we have the planning and implementing change. So we've figured out what the problem is, or we figured out what needs to be improved within the organization. Then we actually go into creating this change through interventions. And then finally, when we go through the interventions process, we then evaluate. So one thing that I've said over and over again is change process doesn't end at the end of the intervention. Really, what happens is you get to the end, or what you think is the end of that intervention, but you have to go back and retest. You have to make sure it's a continuous process, make sure it's a cyclic process where everything is going round and round and round, and you're actually seeing the impact or seeing the effect of what you're doing, and making sure that every single time you can see, oh, there's a room for more improvement, now let's change it. Because with organizational development, we're not waiting till something spoils completely, or till there's a problem, or till there's an issue. Well, we just continuously checking and redressing and readdressing anything that might be the problem. So this is a general model of planned change. In today's conversation, we're going to dwell more on entering and contracting, and then diagnosing. Then after that, when we move forward, we're going to talk about interventions. Those interventions are pretty much our ways of planning and implementing the change. And then finally, we'll see how to reevaluate or keep going back through the process. So let's start with the first one, entering and contracting. So like I said, with entering and contracting, this will most likely affect or be very obvious when your organizational development practitioner, so when we say OD here, we're referring to organizational development, and most times the practitioner. When the organizational development practitioner is external from the organization, so you brought in a contractor, you brought in a sustainability champion that helps other organizations to push sustainability. So this person is not exactly a part of the organization. The person is just part of the organization right now for the entire process. So when that is the case, entering and contracting becomes very, very important. However, even if it's internal, even if your OD practitioner is internal, with the entry and contracting stage, you're trying to understand, is there actually a problem? Is there actually something we want to fix? Or is there actually something that we want to improve on? So the entering and contracting is the high level overview of where the organization is now, and if there are areas that you think might be very good for us to focus on to lead to a better system or better organization. And in entering into the OD relationship, there are three major things we usually look at: is to clarify the organizational issue. So what is the problem? What is the area of improvement? Do we really have something we want to work on? What exactly do we need to work on? Right? Then the second part is to determine the relevant client. Not all sustainability projects would align with every single member of the organization. Not all sustainability projects will align with every department within the organization. While we want to get everyone involved, sometimes there are some clients. So when we look at clients is members of the organization, whether internal or external. There are some clients that be mostly affected by the change process compared to the others. So for example, we want to work on reducing our waste within our production. The clients that will most likely be very involved in this process will be the production and operations team. So we want to identify who the relevant clients are, who are the relevant members of the organization that would be impacted by this change issue. Now, having done that, the next thing is usually to select an organizational development practitioner. So most times we'll select the practitioner first, but sometimes you select them after you've decided what exactly the issue is, the people that are involved. That way you're getting a practitioner that has expertise in the area in which you're dealing with. All right. So usually it's based on your experience, based on expertise. How many years of experience do you have in a similar field that is needed, or how many organizations have you worked with, or even if you are within the organization. So we've realized that the issue is more from the productions and operations department. And so maybe we decide, oh, let's use the productions manager. He has some level of understanding of sustainability. He or she was part of our recycling project last year. So maybe he might have the knowledge to push this change within his team, and so he or she can end up becoming the sustainability champion for this particular project. Right. um Based on that, based on the fact that we have identified who the project who's going to be mostly involved in the project, what the project is involved in, and then who the practitioner is, then we usually would create an organizational development proposal. Now, the key thing I want us to take away from this is, again, sometimes the proposal is high level. It's high level because you really haven't gone in to do any form of analysis. You really haven't gone in to diagnose what the situation of the problem is. So what you're really saying is, okay, we're trying to change around our waste system within the organization. We're trying to reduce waste in our operations. So what is the objective of our project? That's the goal. Our goal is to reduce waste by a certain percentage over the next 10-15 years. What is the proposed process of action plan? How do we ensure that we're going to go through the entire process of reducing the waste? What are the roles and responsibilities? Who are the people that are going to be involved in this particular project? The operations team, the productions team, even the purchasing team, because maybe they could purchase some materials that will make it easier for us to reduce waste. All right. And what are the recommended interventions? What are your fees, your terms and conditions? So from an external perspective, when you're coming into the organization as a consultant, an OD consultant, you would have a fee. You probably have some terms, you have some conditions that need to be aligned between the organization and yourself. But that is not always the case if it's internal. So if you're internal, you're most likely still on a salary. Maybe you might have some extra terms, you might get some hours off for other things. But at the end of the day, really, you're still aligned with the organization itself. So the proposal might not be as detailed as if it's coming from an external perspective. And so what you're doing in your proposal is, this is our high level overview or understanding of what the problem might be. However, do not quote us directly on this because we haven't gone into the data testing. We haven't even collected data in the first place. We haven't really studied the entire being of the organization to be sure that all these things actually would apply. All right. Now, based on that, we go into an OD contract. So again, this is more for external. When you get an external person, you want to have mutual expectations. What are the outcomes and then the deliverables? Even if it's internal, especially if you're paying a person extra money to run this particular process, or maybe you're giving them some time off, or this is a potential for a promotion for them, you might want to actually have a contract, which is saying, what are our mutual expectations? So from the organization, what do you want? From you as an OD practitioner, what do you expect? From the other clients that are going to be involved in this particular conversation, what are we going to get from them? What is the time and resources allocated for this? So how much access do you have to, let's say, the productions team? How much time would you have working on this? Will they give you all the information you need concerning how they're purchasing, concerning how they're converting the materials into finished goods, etc.? Will the key managers and members of the organization be available for you to get information from? And then what are the ground rules? So with ground rules, what is confidentiality? How much information can you release? Especially if it's an external person, how much information can they release to the public? How much information can they use as a research? What is your role in the entire process? All right, so these are the things that will come into the OD contract, and it's the same thing that you see whenever you're doing any form of consulting with an organization. You have to have a contract because that is your legally binding document that really says what you're all about, says how you're going to work on the project, says all the information you would have access to, and every other thing needed. All right, so these are some things we can take a look at. When an OD practitioner is external, there are a lot of things that might affect the kind of relationship you have with the people you're going to work with. These are just a few of them. Sometimes trust. So how would the organization believe that, we're going to give you access to all our data and you wouldn't do anything wrong with it? How do we believe that you're not going to sell out data to other people? Vulnerability, the fear of being vulnerable. So if you are, let's say, General Motors or one of the really top organizations, the people have already said, wow, you're so amazing, you're doing so great. And then now you're allowing an external member to come into your organization to critique you. The fear of actually letting them see how not so great you are can be an issue, and we're going to see how this would end up skewing the entire OD process. All right, the fear of unknown, dependency, not wanting to be dependent on the practitioner, credibility, the credibility of the practitioner. You want to be sure that this person actually has some records, this person has done things that are aligned with what you want him or her to do. So all of these are things that you might end up seeing as some resistance, causes for resistance to the relationship between the client and the OD practitioner. All right, now let's go on to the very sweet part, diagnosing. So we've entered into the relationship. We know that at this point, what we're trying to do is to reduce the waste from the production department. That sounds really great. But now the question is, how are we even sure that there's waste? How are we sure what exactly is the cause of the waste? How are we sure what information we need to ensure that we change things around? Now that is where diagnosing comes into play. So really, diagnosing is, in my opinion, probably the most important part of the OD contract or the sustainability drive within any organization. Because if you don't have the right diagnosis, you would most likely create a solution that doesn't fit within the organization. So when we think about diagnosis, it is pretty much a collaborative process between the members of the organization and the OD consultant. So between the organization and the sustainability champion, to collect pertinent information, to analyze it, and to draw conclusions which will then be used for action planning and intervention. So what that means is, as an OD consultant or as a sustainability champion, before you actually go ahead to plan change, you must have gathered enough data. You must have gotten enough information that actually shows the true state of nature within the organization. If that is not the case, whatever action plan you're going to bring about is most likely not going to be sufficient. And this is something you always have to think about as a consultant for any field at all. You always want to make sure that you gathered enough data to back up every information or every plan that you tend to create for the organization. So we're going to go into the ways through which you can diagnose and the ways through which you can get information and how you can analyze all of that to give enough information for you to plan and for you to create an intervention. Before we go into that, a key thing I want us to see is the diagnostic relationship. In determining what diagnosis looks like, the questions you're going to ask is, who is the OD practitioner? What area of expertise do they have? Who do they work for? Do they work within the organization? Because that would determine the kind of access they would have to information. What do they want? What kind of information are they trying to get? How would they take care of your or protect your confidentiality as an organization? Not all information can be leaked out. Not all information can be sent out. Who will have access to the data? So both the data that has been analyzed and then the ones that haven't been analyzed, how are we going to make sure that it is still secure within the organization? What is in for you as an organization? So of course, at this point, I want to believe that the organization will have a great idea that this is going to lead to some level of effectiveness or efficiency within their system, and then most importantly, can the practitioner be trusted? So all these things here pretty much align back with the issues or factors that might affect the relationship between the client and practitioner. Because when you start getting data and information about a certain business or a specific business, the truth of the matter is the business feels vulnerable to you, even if you're internal. So because you're internal doesn't necessarily mean that they wouldn't feel vulnerable to you. You are internal, but you are still a person that can leave the organization any single day. And so the question is, when you leave after accessing so much data and so much information, how would you protect the vulnerability or the information of the organization? So we're going to look at 3 levels of diagnostic relationship. There's the organization level, there's the group level, and then there's the individual level. Why we're dividing it into three is based on the angle to change that you're looking at within the organization. You realize that it might affect a different set of people. So there's certain change processes or intervention that might be just for specific individuals. So let's assume we don't have the members of our organization do not even have a core value of sustainability. The members within the organization are not so punctual. The members within our organization seem to have lacked motivation. So those are individual levels change that you want to create. So you're going to act based on the individuals, not based on the organization as a whole. I'll go into that in more details when we go to each of them. Then group level. Sometimes the change process might not be for the entire organization. So for example, productions department might be the ones that actually need this change process because they are the ones that are managing the resources, getting the resources into the organization, and then taking it out as external source or as a finished good or finished material. They might be the only ones that you need to change around. But not even just from the product perspective, maybe the way they work together. So if the operations group, for example, have a very weird relationship, they are not as positive with each other, they are not as relational with each other. Maybe you want to really look at what their group dynamics are, and then that would determine the kind of change that you're going to have. So when you're looking at things from the group level, not from the organization level per se, what you're doing is you're doing a group level diagnostic. Now finally, we have the organization level diagnostic, and now this is when we're saying this is a change process that is going to affect the entire organization. So what we're looking out for is the output. And then the output in this sense is not an individual's effectiveness, it's not a group's effectiveness, but the organization's wide effectiveness. Maybe the performance of the organization generally, maybe the productivity of the organization, stakeholder satisfaction. So society is not happy because we're removing a lot of waste. Our carbon footprint is really high. Our community is not happy because we don't have any good relationship within the community. The government itself is not exactly excited with us because somehow we're always at the receiving end of either data privacy, data issues, etc. All of those things are organization wide and not specific to a group, not specific to an individual within the organization, and so would use the organization level diagnostic model. Now, all of these models have one thing in common. And I'm going to go through the other models here, but just let's finish up on this. The one thing is we believe that the organization is an open system. So when we say open system, that means there's an external part. The external part feeds into within the internal part, which is worked on, which is structured, which is systemized to create an output. So there are three parts to every organization. We get external resources, which we use within, and then we release output. So from the organization level diagnostic, our inputs are the general environment. So the macro environment. Specifically for the general environment, we're looking at things like the political factors within where we're operating, the economic factors, the social cultural factors, the technological factors, the legal factors, the environmental factors. So if there's a law in, let's say, BC concerning how much carbon emission a company can produce per quarter, this will come into the input. So that means that if we know that already in our design, we have to ensure that we take that into cognizance so that our output is not going to be above the limit that has been set by the government. We also have the task environment. Task environment is more specific to an organization and its industry. So who are your suppliers? Who are your competitors? Who are the threats within your community or within your industry? Those would also determine our processes. So if you're competing head on head with another organization, another retail organization, for example, that somehow has been able to cut their costs to the minimum, it might be very difficult for you to design a system where you can use sustainable practices or a system where you can use sustainable resources, because usually it's seen that a lot of sustainable resources are more expensive. So what you're going to do is you have to always think about the environment. You have to find out how your strategy can align or can play a role despite the fact that you know that competitors are using more hazardous equipment or materials, but somehow they are able to reduce their cost, which is giving them an edge in terms of pricing with your consumers. All right. And an enacted environment is just how we as members within the organization would perceive the organization's internal and external environment, which usually is an input into the organization. So based on this input, we're going to then have the design components. So the inputs feed into the design components. In the design component, we start with the strategy. So the strategy looks at things like our work processes. What is the structure? What is the management processes within this organization? What is the human resources human resources within this organization? What is our culture? So think about this as the machine that churns up all the things that will produce, or all the things that have entered into the organization that will end up leading to the output. So we've gotten the materials from, we sourced it all the way from, let's say, China, where it was cheaper and also very safe, environmentally safe. Now, what is the process within the organization to ensure that these materials are still used in the best quality? What is the process to ensure that our waste within the organization is minimized? What is the process to ensure that we're hiring only people that actually have the knowledge and the application of what we're trying to achieve within the organization? Now, based on all of that, it would lead to our output. So if we're able to create a great synergy between the inputs, the design components, then we'll be able to get the output that we want or that is favorable to us within the organization. Right. Now the next level, like I said earlier, is the group level. So the group level usually looks more from the teams. How are teams working? How are groups working? And then I know we said this earlier on, when we think about sustainability, it's not just about environment. It's not just about society. It's also about your employees. How do your employees feel about your organization? How do your employees feel about working within your organizations? Do they see it as an organization that aligns with their values? Do they have clarity on what needs to be done at every given time? Do they function really well in a team? What are the group norms? Do you have norms of waste? Do you have norms of nonchalancy? All of these things will also determine your level, especially if you're trying to become a B Corp. All of these things would determine the kind of level that you would see yourself in terms of sustainability. So like every other part, again, the group level is also an open system in the sense that there is the input. The inputs are fed into the design components, which are fed into the output. So the inputs usually will be the organization design, how things are structured within the organization, the culture, how we treat people, how we work, how things are done around here. And those will lead to the design components, which are things like your goal clarity. Do you actually know what is expected of you? Based on the culture within the organization, that will determine if you have a clear goal clarity. Task structure. Do you know what your task is? Do you know how your task is related to the next person? There's no way we can try to be sustainable if people working together have no clear direction amongst themselves. Because what's going to happen is we're going to waste time beyond other resources and materials. We actually waste time, and if you're wasting time also, that means that maybe you need to really review what sustainability means to you as an organization. All right, your group composition, the group norms, how you function within your team, all of those are design components that will lead to outputs, which are team effectiveness, e.g. the quality of work life, the performance, how you work within your team, how you can produce and be effective within the team, and how that will end up churning back into the organization as a whole. And then finally, we have the individual level diagnostic model. So again, open system in the sense that there is the inputs that will lead into the design components and lead into the output. So for individual level, we're looking at things like the design again, looking at things like the culture. What kind of culture do we have within the organization? What is the group design? How are groups designed? What's the group structure? What are your personal characteristics? All of these things will lead to your skill variety, your task identity. So skill variety, we're pretty much looking at how many skill sets you have and how you're able to use them within the organization. With task identity, how you can see the impact of your job all the way to the end result. Task significance, the impact of your job on the world generally, or on the organization, or on your society. If you can see a clear impact of your job in the society that you work in, you might be a bit more motivated to work. Then autonomy, which is your control of decisions, or decision making over your own job, and then getting feedback as well from your results or from your job. Those are things that will come under design components. And then finally, all of this will lead to your output, which is your individual effectiveness, things like your job satisfaction, how you're performing well, or the opposite, maybe you've been always absent because you don't see how all of these things relate well, or your personal development within the organization. So what I want us to see from all of this is how the organization functions. The organization functions in an open system perspective. So whenever we need to create strategies, whenever we're trying to change into a model of sustainability, we have to see how these things would affect all of these components of the open system. So if our sustainability focus is more individual based, so for example, we're trying to reduce the waste that members of the organization produce in their offices, what you're going to look at will be the individual level diagnostic. What is bringing the waste? How do people actually manage this waste? And then what does it lead to? And based on that, you can design an implementation or an intervention that will reduce or eradicate this problem. If what you're trying to bring about is something that would affect more of the group level, what you want to also do is to open up the open system again and see how all of these different components might affect the system that you're trying to bring within the organization. And then if you're trying to do something that is more organization wide or organization specific, what you want to do again is to open up this open system again and see how all of these inputs, design components, outputs, etc. would end up leading to the desired results that you want as an organization. Okay, so key thing you always want to ask yourself in terms of change and sustainability is, does the organization strategy fit with the inputs? So remember how we had our strategy earlier on, especially in the organization level? Does it fit with the input? Are we getting the right, if our strategy is to be more cost effective, how then are we sourcing our materials? Because that will determine if you're able to meet your strategy. Do our design components fit with each other to jointly support the strategy? So we're trying to be cost effective, time effective, etc. But then how is our organization designed? Where are people working from? Do they have a good relationship with each other? Is there a clear communication path between members within the organization? If all of these things are not clear, if all of these are not visible, then again, you probably would have a problem in terms of being able to achieve your sustainability vision. So based on that, now that we understand how the organization works, the next thing we want to do is to actually collect data to support or to view what angle of sustainability we're focusing on. So collecting, analyzing, and feeding back diagnostic information is very important, because while we might have an idea of what we want to do in terms of sustainability, really what makes the difference is our ability to get the right data, our ability to analyze this data, analyze this information that we got, and then make a lot of sense or make some sense out of it. Okay, so this is what the cycle of data collection and feedback looks like. The first thing is establishing the diagnostic relationship and planning of data collection, which is kind of what we've done already. We know that we are trying to increase our relationship with the community, or we know that we're trying to see how to reduce waste from the operations team or from the productions team. Okay, then let us go into the data itself. How do we collect data to see what is currently happening in terms of waste production in the production team? How do we collect this data? How then do we analyze the data that we've collected? Then how do we provide feedback to all the members of the organization, or at least all the members that are involved in this particular process, to ensure that they understand where we're coming from? And then how do we create an action plan that would help us to move ahead, and how do we ensure that we're following up with that? All right, so let's start with the first one, collecting data. We can collect data with several ways, but the key three ways that we usually would do is through questionnaires, through interviews, and through observations. So the productions department has a 70% waste problem. that is quite annoying for you as an organization. And so you have decided that you want to have a conversation, or you want to find out why exactly there's so much waste coming from the productions department. We can do that in three ways. We can do questionnaires. Send out questionnaires to as many people within the department as possible, asking them very basic questions. Hi, how would you rate? So questionnaires usually are on a 5 Likert scale, which is pretty much asking you to rate certain things. So, for example, how would you rate your ability to manage waste? Now that's a very broad question. Your question should never be that broad. But just as an example, how would you rate your ability to manage waste? 5 being very great, 4 being not so great, 3 being somewhere in the middle, 2 being horrible, 1 being very poor. Or another question you can ask is, how likely is it for you to use the right to measure the right resource that is needed for a particular project? So how likely is it for you to measure the right materials that are needed for a specific project? 5 being very likely, 4 being quite likely, 3 being indifferent, 2 being somewhere not likely, 1 being very unlikely. So what you're doing now is you're trying to get information that would help you to answer the question. So if, for example, in this particular question that I asked, we can tell that everybody kept a 2, in the sense that they can't measure how to use the right resources so there is no waste. Maybe the problem is in the measurement. Maybe they don't have enough information on how to measure. Maybe they haven't been trained on how to measure, or they don't have the right equipment, so they don't even know which ones to use to measure, and that's why there's a lot of waste. So your questionnaire should really be targeted in such a way that, 1, it is not leading, so you're not asking questions that are very narrow. 2, you're not asking questions that are too broad. And 3, you can always infer information from your questionnaires. Then the next way is interviews. So you can have one-on-one conversations, with members of that particular team. Hey, how's it going? So I want to know, what's your process like every day when you come to work? What do you work on? How do you determine what your measurements should be? How do you determine what materials to use? Just having all of those conversations, you can see an opportunity for you to get really loads of information or knowledge about how things are done, and that way you might be able to prefer certain solutions that can reduce waste within that particular department. Now, the third way is through observations. I really like observations because with observation, it's not skewed. When you interview people, they want to tell you the best of things. When you ask questions through questionnaire, people feel, it's too much information. Let me just tick anything that is tickable. You really can't tell. But with observations, it's more direct. So what you're doing is you're watching and seeing how a particular person actually does their job, or how a group of people actually do their jobs. So if you can see them directly, maybe you'll be able to see areas that they haven't seen themselves. Maybe you'll be able to see that, why did they throw that particular material away? That was very useful. They could have kept it and used it for something else. So really, observation is your way of going into the environment that these people naturally work in and getting all the information that you can from there. All right. Now, having gotten all this information, the next thing you want to do is to analyze them. So for qualitative is usually written, which usually will be interviews and sometimes observation. 2 key ways that you can use to analyze this is content analysis. So I've interviewed like 30 people, for example, and then they've given me their responses. I start looking for key contents or key themes. It could be content analysis or even thematic analysis, where I start looking for key themes and content in which these people have really explained certain things that I think, okay, this person said this and that makes a lot of sense. So this is probably what the problem is. So based on the questions and based on the answers that have been given, I'm able to quickly analyze and get some level of information. Or it could be the force field analysis, which is this here, which is pretty much just looking at the forces for change and the forces for status quo. So again, remember our Lewin's model. Just say, okay, what are the things that would push us from where we are to where we want to be? So this is our current performance in terms of, let's say, waste management, but this is where we want to get to. So what do we need? New technology, better raw materials. Maybe competition from other groups might make people actually work better, or maybe more pressure from supervisors. And then we have the forces that are driving for status quo, which are things like group performance norms. This is how we do things around here. The fear of change, member complacency, well-learned skills. So we already know this is what we can do. We don't really want to change. Now, with the force field analysis, we're saying how can we improve all of these things so we can push the organization all the way to our desired performance. Now, quantitative tools for measurement or analysis are usually for things like the questionnaire. So we'd use things like descriptive statistics, we'll do correlation, we'll do relations, regressions, we probably will do difference tests, etc. These are more statistical things. A lot of them are done usually Excel, using the SPSS and some other tools. These are ways to just get information that we've gotten through our questionnaire. All right. So based on that, we can now go on to feedback. So we've gotten all this information, we've analyzed this information. Now, how can we ensure that we're providing feedback that can drive the change that we want to see? So our feedback is what would determine what action we're going to take. Remember, all we're doing now is just getting enough information so that we can actually prefer good solutions, create a key action plan or a key change strategy that would help the organization. So the question, if you use this graph, you can easily tell what kind of feedback you need to give and what it leads to. Let's start from the beginning. When you finish getting all this data, if you do not provide feedback here, there wouldn't be any change. But when you provide feedback and say, you know what, after we actually did this observation and this questionnaire and these interviews, we realized that, oh, there's a lot of members of staff that are actually not able to do the production that we need, maybe because they don't have the right training, or it seems like there's a discrepancy between what is expected and what is actually being done. If this creates some level of energy, if people start saying, oh, okay, that's interesting, or maybe they don't have the right machines. Now, we're not sure, but it looks like they don't have the right techniques, they don't have the right machines, they believe they don't have the right equipment to actually get the work done. And if you try to explain this to the members of the organization, and then there's a new energy like, oh, okay, we want to know more, then that's a good sign. Now, I should have said, who are we giving the feedback to? Usually, you are giving this feedback to the members that are going to be involved in the change process. So, having gone into the organization's production team, I know that the production members are going to be part of the change process. I know that some level of managers are also going to be part of the change process. So, these are the people that you're going to be providing this feedback to. So, if there's energy that is created from the feedback, now the next thing is, what kind of energy? What is the direction of the feedback? Is it energy to deny or fight the data? So if you said it seems like people are not well trained to actually be more effective and efficient in their jobs, and people are saying, wait, what do you mean? We're very trained. Are you trying to say we don't have the right skill set? What is going to happen is you're going to lead to anxiety, resistance, and most likely no change. But if after you put this out there, you see people actually say, oh, okay, let us see what the problem is then. Let us create some level of solutions to these problems. Then that's good. Now, the next thing is, do we have the structures and processes to turn this energy? If people are actually interested in what we want to do we then have the structures to do it? If we don't have the structures, what is going to happen is failure and frustration and no change. So we know there's a problem. People have agreed there's a problem, but we don't have the structures and systems within the organization to actually create this change. And so we will not have any change in the organization. However, if we say yes, if we actually have the structures, or we can build the structures, we can put in place the system and the processes. If that is possible, then change would actually occur. So feedback is very important, because if it's after feedback that we're able to go into the intervention itself that can help us create the kind of change that we want within the organization. So quick one, what we've quickly looked at right here is we look at the entering and contracting relationship, we looked at the diagnosing relationship, and then now based on all of that, we want to go ahead to create a system, or we want to go ahead to create the change plan that would help the organization move forward. All right. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this actually was understandable.